There are 4 great sayings that explain the truth of our existence in one of the greatest spiritual texts in the world. Today, we will explore the 4th and final great saying. This is the 4th and last episode in a 4-part series on the great sayings of the Mahavakyas. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mahavakyas means great sayings. Maha means great, and Vakya means saying or sentence. Now, the 4 great sayings of existence arise from the Upanishads. Now, this is Swami Nikhilananda's translation of the Upanishads, which is a thorough examination of the Upanishads and the one that I recommend for you to read. This is a great translation. It'll take you a while to get through, but he does have a smaller version, the principal Upanishads, which you can check out as well. But I highly recommend this translation of the Upanishads. And so the 4 Mahavakyas are what the great Rishis came to. They were the conclusion of existence itself. Now today we're going to speak about the 4th, as I said. Now the 4th Mahavakya is I am Atma Brahma. Now, what does this mean? Now, I am basically means this. And Atma means Atman, the undifferentiated consciousness of Atman within you, which is identical with the ultimate reality of Brahman, which is Brahma. I am Atma Brahma. So basically what this great saying, this Mahavakya states, is that this Atman is Brahman. So if we were to take the Mahavakyas sequentially, this would be a concluding statement of all 4 Mahavakyas, even though we shouldn't take them sequentially. And the other 3 speak similarly about how Atman is Brahman in different ways. But this is like a concluding statement because this Atman is Brahman. It's never been anything else. And so often when you hear a lot of teachers, I'll say Atman is Brahman. This comes from actually this Mahavakya of I am Atma Brahma. And so this Mahavakya is pulling the rug from underneath your ego persona system, that in Sanskrit, which we know as Jiva. So what the Rishis discovered was that they indeed are Brahman. The Atman within them, that undifferentiated consciousness, is identical with the Brahman. And so in the Avadhuta Gita, one of the great Nididhyasana texts, there are a few verses that speak about the great analogy of a jar. And so in this analogy, the air within the jar is the same as the air outside of the jar. And so we need to think about ourselves in that sense, right? So we need to crack our jiva because within us is the Atman, which is identical with Brahman. And so we need to crack our own personal jar so that we can merge with the ultimate reality of existence. That's how we can realize that we indeed are Brahman. We are that Atman, which is Brahman. But we can't come to that conclusion if we're holding on to this ego persona system, this identity that we think we are. Now, it doesn't mean that you will disappear completely as a person. You'll continue to function as you are in this world, but you have come to this realization, this recognition, what they say in Dzogchen Buddhism. You've come to this recognition that other people haven't come to. And so that's what makes you different from other people, is that you've come to this realization that others haven't. They still live in the ignorance of Brahman. So there's this ignorance, right? This avidya, that people don't understand that all is Brahman. It verily is Brahman, and they are identical with it, but they live within the jar. They live within this jar, and they don't know that their ultimate nature is identical with Brahman itself, because they live within the jar of the jiva. And so they're living within that persona system, which then is limited, right? Because the ego is fundamentally limited. Identity is limited. And we live within this limitation when we are all in everything. As the 3rd Mahavakya stated, right? Pragyanam Brahma. That consciousness is Brahman. That the wisdom consciousness alone is all that exists. And we are identical with that, right? And so that's what I am Atma Brahma are saying. So when we look at I am Atma Brahma, this is a lot about how we practice, particularly in meditation, about how we perceive the world. Do we identify with the ultimate, or do we identify with our own little ego and its petty little problems. What do we identify most with? Now, it's not that you don't have to deal with your problems and this and that, but can you deal with them from a higher state? That's the challenge for all of us. But how much time in the day are you identified with your actual true nature as opposed to this temporary wave you believe you are? And that is the challenge for all of us. That is what all spiritual aspirants are on the path to realize, that we are fundamentally Brahman. We are Atman, which is Brahman. And so how much are we identifying with that as opposed to identifying with our petty little problems? So we need to be sincere with our spiritual practice. We need to be sincere in our inquiry. We need to be sincere in our study and not believe we are better than anyone else or believe we are some sort of enlightened being, but humble yourself to the great knowledge and just work on that process of identification with the ultimate reality. I was taught once a great mantra when you walk around. Say if you just go for a walk in the city, right? You're just walking and nothing's going on. And I never walk with these things in. This is a great no-no. Never walk with these things in, particularly if you are invested in the great knowledge. But so when you're walking around, right, you need to recite this mantra to yourself. All is Brahman and I am that. All is Brahman and I am that. All is Brahman and I am that. You don't want to turn into a crazy person, but you want to reinforce who you truly are and also crowd out the noise in your mind, because the noise in your mind will continue no matter how enlightened you think you are. The noise in your mind will continue. The vrittis will continue, but the volume will have decreased the closer and closer you get to understanding that you are Brahman. It won't be as loud as it is when you identify with the ego. So you need to, in some sense, unite with that Brahman, even though you're always that, right? But you need to, in some sense, keep a cultivator's mindset. I see a lot of people on the path, they don't keep a cultivator's mindset because they read such knowledge and they just instantly think they're that, right? They make grand statements like, I am that. Atman is Brahman. I'm Atman and I'm already Brahman. I don't need to worry about anything else. Until you step on their foot. And then all things change, because that's not an authentic and sincere proclamation. They are not really that. They have made a statement that they have read, and their ego thinks it's a good thing to state because it keeps their ego alive. If you understood these Mahavakyas, you would never make any grand statements about them, or that you are what it states, right? That you are Brahman. Again, the Upanishads state that those who know the Brahman do not know the Brahman. Those who do not know the Brahman know the Brahman. Now, you haven't made Brahman an object of knowledge here, right? So you haven't made it an object of knowledge, and you haven't made a statement that you are that, because who would make that statement? That would be the ego, right? The ego would make that statement that they are it. And look, all sorts of people make all sorts of excuses there because the ego is struggling to survive. And that's just the ego trying to survive. Even if someone wants to write a comment about it now, they're making an egotistical statement. So you need to, in some sense, keep that cultivator's mindset. And it reminds me of this brief passage in the Mundakya Upanishad, which states, Om is the bow, the arrow is the self, Atman, Brahman the mark. By the undistracted man is it to be penetrated. One should be in it as the arrow becomes one with the mark. I love that verse, becoming one with the mark. I love that the bow is Om, the arrow is the Atman, and the target is Brahman, which encapsulates all of the Mahavakyas, all of Sanatana Dharma, all of Advaita Vedanta, and the great spiritual knowledge, the Brahma Vidya, the knowledge of Brahman. And so I love that quote. I really love that quote. And that's how we've got to come to it, right? We need to keep an innocent cultivator's mindset, not in the sense that you don't know that you're it, right? You've come to that recognition that you're it. But what I see often with people on the path is they might come to that recognition, but it's like they fall off the wagon because they go back into watching Netflix, binging on junk food. They lose this real bodhicitta, this enthusiasm and energy for the spiritual path, because they think that they know it, but you can see that they don't truly know it because you don't see it in their own lives. You don't see them practicing it in their own lives or living it, not just practicing it, but living it. You don't see them living it in their own lives. It's pretty much a cop-out, right? So it's innocent to keep a cultivator's mindset. You meditate because that's what Buddhas do, as Shunro Suzuki said. You do these things because you love it. I love meditation. I love reading the great scriptures. Do you? That's the question I want to ask you. Do you love meditation, love reading the great scriptures more than you love watching Netflix, more than you love watching Monday Night Football? Do you love it more than that? And once you have that love and that enthusiasm, then it's a beautiful thing. You can just move through your life efficaciously and things will happen for you, but you won't be too vexed about why this and that has happened because you are moving towards the great ocean of Brahman. But we need to really sincerely think about that, right? Think about keeping that cultivator's mindset. Not in the sense that you got to cultivate all the time, but that you have an enthusiasm for understanding this knowledge at a deeper level. To understand that truly this Atman is Brahman. Not just making the statement, right? The Rishis didn't just make the statement or internally realize this statement and then their whole life just disappeared. They continued to live their lives day in and day out and would have encountered situations and circumstances where their mind needed to be applied. But as I said, the difference between them and the average Joe and Jane was this realization, this recognition that truly Atman is Brahman. Now, all we need to do is truly come to that innocently and humbly, come to that recognition, but not in an arrogant way, but in a way that your life becomes a reverberation of these four Mahavakyas. Shanti, shanti, shanti.